beginning to be recognized as a valid and valuable experience. And it occurred to me that no one had ever asked the women who had lived through this as wives and mothers and as working women in their days what the experience was like, what it did to them as people. So I began talking to these women, and what I found out was some very fascinating and compelling information. And the opinions that they had about not only how it affected their lives, but about how their husbands related to the event, I think gives a very fascinating slant on a historic period. It's like getting it right from the horse's mouth, so to speak, rather than reading about it years later in a history book. So I feel that the film is kind of an oral history of America that hasn't quite been captured in any way at all.
And you focus primarily on 4 of the wives.
Yes.
Tell us about them. Who were they? What are their names?
The 4 women are Sadie Ornitz, a woman who's 96 years old now, who has obviously had a wealth of experience. Her husband was Sam Ornitz, who wrote an American classic Jewish book called Haunch, Paunch, and Jowl, and was an early screenwriter in the 20s. One was Zelma Wilson, who is a well-known architect, and her husband, Michael Wilson, wrote the film Bridge on the River Kwai. Another is Tyba Wilner, whose husband was the agent who set up what became known as the front system, under which the blacklisted writers could write under other names. And the third one is Adrian Scott, who was I'm sorry, the fourth one, yes. Adrian Scott was a producer who produced a picture called Crossfire, which was the first picture about anti-Semitism ever produced in Hollywood.
And a real groundbreaking effort.
Absolutely.
Are all 4 of these Hollywood 10, are these all Jewish men, Jewish women?
Well, let me clear up one thing. They're not all 4 of what was called the Hollywood 10. The 10 were the 10 men who actually went to prison. Okay. 2 of these went to prison, 2 others were just blacklisted. And we can talk about that distinction a little later.
Well, but a life ruined is a life ruined.
Yes, right. So 2 of them were blacklisted, 2 of them went to prison. 3 of the men were Jewish. Adrian Scott was not. No, I'm sorry, 2 of the men were Jewish. 3 of the women are Jewish. Michael Wilson, Adrian Scott were not Jewish. Joan Scott is not Jewish, but the other 3 women are.
Did they feel that it was religious persecution because they're Jews, or did they think it was strictly political, their point of view?
Well, if you could read the testimony that Sam Ornitz wrote, it was all about the fact that this was the first step in a fascistic propaganda in which the Jew was naturally the first one attacked, and then next would come the Catholic and the homosexual and whoever else fascism takes off after. But it was also well known in the country at that time that Robert Stripling, who was the chief inquisitor for the House Un-American Activities Committee, was the most renowned anti-fascist, the most renowned fascist in the country. So it was obviously very Jewish-oriented. Of course, there were many Jews in Hollywood at the time, and many of their careers were destroyed.
Okay. We're going to take a look at the part of this film in progress now, called Then and Now Are One. Written, produced, directed by Judy Chaiiken.
This committee, under its mandate from the House of Representatives, has the responsibility of exposing and spotlighting subversive elements wherever they may exist. It is only to be expected that such elements would strive desperately to gain entry to the motion picture industry, simply because the industry offers such a tremendous weapon for education and propaganda.
Hollywood fights back.
This is Judy Garland. Have you been to a movie this week? You're going to a movie tonight, and maybe tomorrow? Look around the room. Are there any newspapers lying on the floor? Any magazines on your table? Any books on your shelves? It's always been your right to read or see anything you wanted to. But now it seems to be getting kind of complicated. For the past week in Washington, the House Committee on Un-American Activities has been investigating the film industry.
In 1947, after the actual hearings with the 10, there was a groundswell of support in the Hollywood community for the 10. a very strong feeling that this committee had no right coming here and attacking people and, in effect, threatening free speech in the form of films. And a number of celebrities banded into a group called the Committee for the First Amendment. And some of these people were Humphrey Bogart, Lauren Bacall, Danny Kaye, Katharine Hepburn, Moss Hart, really a cross-section of the industry at that time. And these people went on a chartered flight to Washington to demonstrate support for the Hollywood 10. It was very moving, and I think in the context of the times, it was especially moving because it took courage to stand up at that time and risk identification with the Hollywood 10.
This is Humphrey Bogart. We sat in the committee room and heard it happen. We saw it. We said to ourselves, it can happen here. We saw American citizens denied the right to speak by elected representatives of the people. We saw police take citizens from the stand like criminals after they'd been refused the right to defend themselves. We saw the gavel of a committee chairman cutting off the words of free Americans. The sound of that gavel, Mr. Thomas, rings across America. Because every time your gavel struck, it hit the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States.
It was devastating for people to, among friends, to feel that someone that you'd been close to, that you'd cared for, loved, became an informer. It was almost unendurable. There were some people who took it better than others. Mike took it very, very hard when people that he had been very, very close to informed on him. He felt personally betrayed, and he felt that he could never ever have any contact with these people. And furthermore, this attitude of his remained throughout his entire life. He never really warmed up to the informers.
I know several writers, I know of several writers in the motion picture business who are reputedly fellow travelers or possibly communists. I don't know about that.
You have no personal knowledge of it yourself?
I know one gentleman employed at the studio at which I'm employed, Mr. Lester Cole, who is reputedly a communist. I wouldn't know, personally.
What is your present occupation?
An actor.
I think the people who informed were motivated for many different reasons. I think a large majority of them simply didn't want to give up the huge salaries that they were earning, the good life that they were living, and they were fearful of being ostracized from society. That was a big fear. Normally, the stool pigeons would always make it a point of going to their best friends, the ones that they were going to inform on, and practically asking their permission and telling them in advance what they were going to do.
My career has been ruined because of this. Don't present me with the choice of either being in contempt of this committee and going to jail, or forcing me to crawl through the mud to be an informer. I beg you not to force me to do this.
There are some who said that all the people involved in the McCarthy period were all victims, but I don't agree with that. There are victims, they're all victims, I think, in a deep philosophical sense, but certainly the informers had a choice to make, and it was a moral choice, and they chose. We all chose. So it's hard to forgive them. Somebody asked me once, he says, will you forgive or forget? I says, well, I could, perhaps in the extremities I can forgive, but I can never forget. And these people certainly cannot be my friends because they're not to be trusted.
I think a great deal of internal hurt was done to these people beyond the obvious destruction of their careers and their finances. I think a lot of these people were never the same again. I don't think some of them ever will recover from that experience. And for that very reason, for what it's done to me, for what it did to Adrian, I'll never forgive informers either.
When my husband went to prison, I then devoted the rest of that year to talking to the community on all levels about the injustice, about the unfairness, and about the victims of hysteria. They made a film on behalf of the Hollywood 10. And I recall that I spent my days with this film going to the community, going to the trade unions, going to all kinds of organizations in behalf of their fight.
The committee is now free to operate, to drag before it 1,000 people, or the million it boasts it has on its list. How are you going to answer the committee's questions?
Answer yes or no. Are you a member of the Communist Party, of the Progressive Party? Did you ever give $1 to Loyalist Spain?
When we were asked, are you now or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party, the committee was really preparing to ask you, are you now or have you ever been in favor of peace?
The one cry that must come from the heart, please never let this happen again.
Sadie Ornitz, it's such a provocative way to end. Don't ever let it happen again. You live in Hollywood. This is your community still today. Do you see any residual fears there? Could this happen again?
Well, I see residual fears. Whether it would happen again in the same way, I doubt that it could happen again in the same way. But of course, there are always certain groups attempting censorship. They're going on right now. I mean, there's a big move about censorship against the record industry, for instance.
On this issue, that censorship cleaning up what they perceive to be dirty lyrics.
Right, right. But there's always somebody moving on somebody else's opinion in this country. And I think we always have to look at the issues and discover exactly what is behind them. Whether this would happen, I don't think so. I think people's eyes have been opened. But residual fear from it, oh yes, oh yes. I feel very strongly that the Hollywood system still operates under the rules that were laid down in this period.
In what sense, Judy?
Well, when this came about, the prime factor that motivated, there was a great turnaround in Hollywood after this period to avoid any kind of sociological topics. Social issues were forbidden in films for a while, and films took on a kind of a mindless trend. And it's only been in the past few years with some courageous people, say like Jane Fonda, who did China Syndrome, and a few other people who are willing to form independent productions and stick their neck out, that we've had any kind of films that were critical of our society. And the studio system still is not willing to make films that are critical.
Or make waves.
Or make waves, because what happened was that during this time, as Walter Winchell said, Wall Street jingled the purse strings and the studios responded. In other words, there was a certain amount of support for the Hollywood 10 in the beginning, but once the purse strings began to be jingled and they realized their funding was going to be cut off, they just backed down completely and blacklisted all the people who were in the least bit tainted, and that's how Hollywood kept rolling. But it was a very changed Hollywood, and I think there is still a residual feeling in Hollywood these days. There's a kind of a conservatism about what can be done at studios that has to do with the fear that if you step on government toes, they could chop your head off.
Have you personally experienced the timidity in Hollywood, their fear of some subjects?
Yes, I think it's been very apparent to me during the past 20 years of my life. There are topics in Hollywood that just won't get handled, that people just want to stay away from. I'll tell you my most clear experience of that. I started my career as an actress in Hollywood in the mid-50s. And for about 6 or 7 years, I worked in films, and I never had a decent part. There were always just trashy parts in movies about teenagers, you know, things that had no content to them. And I never could figure out why I couldn't get a part in a decent film. And then about in the early 60s, I got a part in a film called Johnny Got His Gun.
Oh.
And it was with Dalton Trumbo.
Yes.
And
very powerful anti-war movie.
Absolutely. And of course it was done completely outside of the studio system, and it was done by Dalton himself and never made back its money, I'm sure. But that began to open my eyes as to the difference between what those people had been trying to do, who had been involved in the Hollywood system prior.
We should explain, Dalton Trumbo was one of the Hollywood 10.
He was one of the Hollywood 10, yes, and wrote many very powerful and very successful movies. And Johnny Got His Gun, of course, was from his great anti-war movie, Johnny Got His Gun. So I realized that the difference between the kind of films I would have liked to have been working in and the kind of films I was allowed to work in was due to the fact that the writers whose work I admired and most would have liked to have been working in had been mainly cut out of the Hollywood system.
Kind of a pre-censorship, really.
Yes,
rather than
right.
buck the system.
Exactly.
What originally piqued your curiosity? And what actually led you personally? You know, this film has become something of a crusade of yours, but what was the initial interview that got you interested in doing a film on the women?
Well, quite by accident, I met Tyba Wilner. Tyba lives in a community outside of Los Angeles called Ojai, which is a kind of an art community, and she runs a bed and breakfast there. And I had gone up to Ojai to attend a concert and stayed at her bed and breakfast, and we began talking, and she told me about the Blacklist years. It was fascinating stuff, and I asked her if I could come up with a camera and shoot an interview on her, and I did. And people saw that interview and encouraged me to do more on her. And I applied for a grant at the American Film Institute, and they gave me seed money to get started. And once I was started on it, then the rest of it sort of fell into place.
For many of these women, this must have been very painful for them to recall this. Did you have to persuade them to be friendly witnesses?
Yeah, you know, it was a very, very sensitive issue, because here were people who had spent their entire lives defending their right to silence, and here you come prying and asking exactly the same questions that they have stood up against all their lives. But there was a desire in them to tell their stories. And there were a few women who were not willing to be on camera. I had interviewed about 7 or 8 women. And there was one woman who could not even talk without bursting into tears constantly. So I chose 4 women who I felt would be willing to talk and who would make interesting subjects. Then it took me about, a year of meeting with these women, interviewing them with a tape recorder, discussing their lives before we became free enough and easy enough with each other for them to trust that what I was going to do was not going to be harmful to them. And that's when we did the interviews.
Did any of the women feel, in retrospect perhaps even, that this was a persecution of them as Jews?
Well, I think they all saw it as a persecution of Jewishness. They didn't focus on that as much as they focused on the rights issue. But it was so apparent during the trials, the hearings, that it was a Jewish issue. It was a very popular thing for J. Parnell Thomas, who was the head of the House On-American Activities, to refer to any witness who was brought before him who, say, was an actor who had changed his name by his Jewish name. So when someone like Edward G. Robinson or John Garfield would come before him, he would say, Edward G. Robinson, formerly known as, and then he would give his Jewish name. So that he reinforced constantly how many Jews were involved and how many of the people were really Jewish but were hiding behind some kind of other name, as though it were something evil to have taken a theatrical name.
How did the incident that we kind of call the Hollywood 10, the Hollywood blacklisting, how did that period of time end, Judy? How did it get resolved?
Well, nothing ever resolved the issue. I think McCarthy brought about the demise of the House Un-American Activities Committee by his own maniacal behavior.
Sort of done in by television in a way.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, the man really brought about his demise and the demise of the entire House Un-American Activities. And I think as long as we continue to show these films and remind young people about how despots work and how you have to be on your guard against these kind of people, maybe we can prevent this from happening again. But we do have to keep our eyes open, and we have to know that, you know, they get cleverer and cleverer all the time.
What are your hopes for the films? What are your dreams for it?
I hope I can finish it. That's my main hope for the film. I hope I can raise the next $30,000 so that I can finish it.
You want it to be a 30-minute documentary?
Yes.
And
well, I have commitments from the local PBS station in Los Angeles to air it, and I hope that it will be aired at other PBS stations, and that it will be shown in schools as an educational film, and that many young people will see it. I think that's the most impressive thing. When someone who's under the age of 20 sees this, they're practically shocked by the fact that such a thing could have happened. This material is not covered in schools, and I think it needs to be, and young people have got to be reminded that the title of the piece, Then and Now Are One, comes from a Lillian Hellman quote about the period in her book, Scoundrel Time. She says, I look back on the past, and I know that that was then, and I know that this is now, but I can see that the years and the events between then and now are one. So she is in effect asking us not to forget.
Not to forget. Well, I won't forget to thank you for joining us here
thank
today,
you very
Judy
much.
Chaiiken.
Thank you.
And I want to tell anyone who would like more information about Then and Now Are One, which is still in progress, still needing supporters, and if you want information about it, to please write to us. We'll be happy to put you in touch with Judy. And thank you for taking the time
very
to
much,
be with us
Marilyn.
today.
I really appreciate it.
Okay.
Are you a member of the Screenwriters Guild?
I wish to reply to that question by saying that this involves a serious question of conscience for me.
Conscience?
Conscience, sir. Conscience. Kindly let me answer the question. I am asking this as a citizen and taxpayer of representatives of my government to let me answer the question conscientiously. I say you do raise a serious question of conscience for me when you ask me to act in concert with you to override the Constitution.